And I'm going to have my phone here.
I have mine too.
Because I find it really distracting watching it.
Okay, we're live.
Are we? Oh my God, I can't find it. Here we go. Hello, we are live, and it says we've been live for nearly 2 minutes. So that means people probably heard swearing and someone tell us if they can see us. I can't see if we're live or not.
I'm gonna check right now too. Hi everybody.
Hi. My phone has frozen, so I can't see if we're live. And then there's that horrible delay on the computer. So my mouth's moving about 20 seconds after the voice. Yes. So if someone is watching and wants to just drop us some kind of emoji, that would be amazing, so that we know you can see us and hear us. So we are here. Oh, hi, Carly. Thank you. I hope you guys didn't, hi, Cher. I hope you guys didn't hear us swearing and cursing while we were trying to get it set up.
Every now and then we see the words shit and fuck, so I'm sorry if that. Oh, wait. So welcome everybody. We always are really light with all of this stuff because we've got to be, yes, parenting is serious. I mean, but it also has got to be in the spirit of playfulness and fun. And I do apologize if my words were offending to anybody who's watching or listening, but I know you've heard those words before. So let's laugh together and be playful together. So I'm super excited that we're here. This is our first in a series of many, right, Sarah?
Absolutely. Let's say weekly.
Weekly, daily, monthly, hourly, whatever makes us inspired, and whatever inspires you guys, because we want to be able to come in here and create a dialogue around those topics that are under your skin right now, that you're dealing with, that are alive for you. So this is an opportunity to not only be a part of the dialogue, but to be witness to Sarah and I really unpack some of the things involved. So, yeah. All right. So I want to say hi to Carly and Cher and Jessie. So we haven't really gotten into anything yet. So Sarah, this topic is a topic that you wanted to bring up. You want to go ahead and frame what these, how we're going to explore the idea of boundaries.
Yeah. So actually, I just did a live in another Facebook group just a few minutes ago, and what I was actually talking about in that group was how to go from like attachment parenting, those early days of connecting with our babies through, baby wearing and bed sharing and breastfeeding, all the kind of tenets of attachment parenting that many of us in this group would have practiced or would at least be aware of, what you then do next. So that's what I was talking about in the live. And one of the comments that came up was from someone watching was, don't children need boundaries? And that does come up a lot in the stuff that we talk about, Lainey, in our groups, and just interactions that we have with other people, and the stuff that I share on Facebook as well. And a lot of the specific issues that come up and challenges that come up with parents are loosely categorized by that: boundaries, limits. Don't children need them? Like, don't they need consistency and limits? And that's what we're going to talk about. So we'd love to know what you guys who are watching think about that. And I'll tell you what we think about it, but we'd also love this to be a conversation. That's always much more fun and gives you guys much more value as well. So,
Sarah, it's really interesting to me. Early on, when I first started traveling and world schooling, the biggest question that I got from parents was, doesn't your son need stability? And that, to me, that question was just so sort of confronting and so perplexing, because the concept of stability in so many people's minds meant having a brick and mortar home, meant having a routine, meant having, you know, certain amenities, having, you know, whatever it was, right? And that, to me, all of these external definitions went into that word of stability. And I never connected those things with the term stability. And for the first time, as we started to travel, my son really had a stable household, because I was the household that was 100% completely present for him for the first time. And I think sort of shifting your definition is got to be the first part of having these sorts of conversations. So stability did not mean any of those things, but being there as a stable parent, and a parent that was committed to him, was indeed the act of stability. So when we look at taking it a little bit farther to the word of boundaries, we think of boundaries as something that you cannot cross. Here are the lines in the sand, and here's where you can go, and here's where you cannot go. And somewhere along the line, we must have agreed that children need these things. Where do you think that comes from?
Are you asking me where I think it comes from? Well, you know, boundaries certainly make it, I see in some families, boundaries certainly make things easier for the parent to navigate. That's what I see. I see parents needing to have control. I see parents needing to know what's going on, and it makes their life easier. And I also think we're told that's how we can be a good parent. And we want to be a good parent, right? Like, not only do we want to be a good parent because we want to produce amazing children, but we also want validation from society that we're being a good parent. I think this is particularly true for mothers, not to undermine what fathers contribute, but it is normally the primary caregiver that carries the weight and what I came to see as a burden of what other people think of our children, and thus of us. So boundaries and rules, I guess is another word for that, can make it much easier moving forward in the world. I can see that. I was gifted with 4 children, and I talk about this a lot because my children are the reason I'm here. My children are exactly the reason I've found my path in life and what I want to share with other people, because my children wanted to cross that line in the sand. Oh, they didn't just want to, they did. They didn't ask for permission. They just did it. And every single limit and boundary and rule that I thought we should have, they negotiated their way out of. And so actually it put into question the need for them, because we were still fine. We found ourselves living without these rules, and we were actually still fine. So to me, there was this question then of, well, do we actually need them?
Yeah. For me, it's really interesting. This is not necessarily related to boundaries, but this is related to our preconceived ideas that we decide upon early on. And I just want to tell you briefly a little story. Before Mira was born, I wrote out my birth plan. And I did all this research. I read everything I could about how to be the best parent. I had never even held a child. Mira was the first child I had ever held in my entire life. And that was like 30 something years. And that by itself is really crazy. And so I did all this research, and I learned everything that I could. And I created these ideas, or this set of rules of how I was going to parent, the type of parent I was going to be, what I would allow, what I would not allow. That started with the birth plan, which, by the way, just totally got crumbled up and thrown in the trash because my body did its own thing. But so that was the first sort of slap that, you know, best laid plans are meant to be broken, to be challenged. But the second one, as if the first one wasn't strong enough, you know, I was going to do this beautiful natural birth and a water birth and all this gorgeous stuff that I had planned out, but instead my water broke and then I went into labor for 40 more hours. And so I didn't get to have a water birth, you know, like all this stuff happened that was very different than how I imagined it. But I started off with the idea that my son would not use a pacifier. I am not one of those people who will just put this plastic plug in a child's mouth and, you know, let them pacify themselves. I was against it. I had this thing. And so I didn't. But what happened was he had this really strong sucking impulse. And I had been giving pacifiers by people during the baby showers. And I refused to unwrap them. And they were there on the side. And it was the pile of things that I was going to give away. And the first week he started, and then started sucking his arms and making marks up and down his arms. Second week, other arm, sucking his arms, making these marks up and down his arms. Finally, I gave in and gave him a pacifier because guess what? That's what he needed. And for me, the realization that I needed to be flexible, to be in the moment and be present with whatever it is that they need. And they're going to present us with challenge after challenge after challenge. And something as simple as a pacifier did not trigger me. But had it been something much later on about, I don't know, you know, maybe I had a rule about not pulling my hair, and at 15, all he wanted to do is pull my hair. This is not true, by the way. I'm just making up an example, but maybe that might be something a little bit stronger that would give me that triggering response. And not to say that pulling my hair is good or bad. It just happens to be, this is an example that popped into my head and I'm sharing with you as a potential trigger. I wasn't triggered with the sucking. I was challenged with being able to be flexible to change my idea about what the type of parent I was going to be and the type of child he was going to be. So that gave me a little bit of insight that I needed to step back, be flexible, understand that the boundaries or the ideas or the rules were arbitrary, and that it was my work not to be triggered or affected once the reality of being a parent stepped in and I needed to change those things. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting story.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good example of how things that we think are absolutes mostly aren't. So you had this absolute idea of the kind of mother that you were going to be, which was not a mother that used a pacifier. And through Miro, you know, giving you strong signals about what he actually needed, you were able to work through that and realize that, you know, you needed to let go of the attachment, being that kind of person. And I think for me, that's where I see rules and boundaries often in families. They are often related to the kind of parent we thought we were going to be and the kind of children we thought we were going to have. And that might work fine in some families, but it didn't work in our family because my children didn't really care about what I thought about what kind of children I was going to have. They were just the children that they were and still are. And so actually what we've found is very, very few rules or limits actually needed to be held tight because almost all of them can be up for negotiation. I just wanted to Cher just put in a comment about that actually, like she's saying she came to realize many boundaries are arbitrary. I made them up from a place of control versus real safety, etc. And yeah, I mean, that is the journey that that you go on when you start questioning this stuff. You realize usually prompted by your kids, that these things that you thought were hard and fast and could not be broken actually can be. They can be pushed and they can be renegotiated. And that very few of them are about safety, really. And even some of the ones that we think might be, you know, like an example that I often give is when my youngest child would absolutely refuse to hold my hand to cross a road. And some people might say, well, couldn't you have forced her? Well, no, because as soon as she saw the road coming up and knew that I wanted to hold her hand, she would run up to the road and stand at the road and look both ways and then cross the road before I even got there. And it was fairly typical for all of the kids to be kind of up ahead on scooters or running. And so unless I was literally going to leave, you know, the shopping bags on the side of the road and run after her, she made the decision that she was not holding to that rule. And she never got hit by a car, and she never had any issues or incidents. And she probably freaked out some cars that didn't realize that she actually was perfectly capable at 3 years old of crossing a road by herself. But she proved to me that even on those things that we think are to do with safety, they can often be tested as well. And actually the safest thing ended up being just trusting her, which puts other grown-ups sometimes in an uncomfortable position, because when they see a parent trusting their children so much, it brings up a lot of feelings in them. So that's something, you know, that we've had to navigate as well. Hi, Emma. Hi, Casey. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to drop any comments in, we'd love you to. We're talking about boundaries and do children need them? And Lainey and I are going to do our best to convince you that, you know, they don't need as many as we think. And we'd love to think about that.
One of the big, you know, lessons and pieces of work that I processed through my journey of being a parent was the recognition that the control that you're talking about, our impulse is to control, and that is a response from fear. And fear by itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. Fear can be a warning to be aware, to be alert. We've got to recognize if our natural impulses to be on fight, flight, or freeze is activated. You know, is it a survival mechanism? And if it's not about the bear chasing you right now, and it's about the fear of what could happen in the future, the majority of human beings on this planet that have not done work around fear and control go into a stage or a state of control, right? As a way to address the fear. And if we can just recognize that fear is a beautiful emotion, just like all the emotions are. It happens to be a warning emotion, to be alert and aware, but the response does not have to be to control the scenario. And control, when you add that to a family relationship, you're starting then to cross over. Now we can talk about that word boundaries of whatever our family culture has been created, and the boundary that could be crossed in that moment, which is another use of the word boundary, is actually not living in alignment with the values of your family. So you want to talk a little bit about that, because the word itself is not a bad word. Boundaries is not a bad word, but let's learn how to apply this in a way that is meaningful. Yeah.
Oh, good morning, Emma. Oh, and Vashti, we've got two early birds from Australia. What time is it there, guys? Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah. It is, Vashti's just commented about making a switch from being really controlling to letting life unfold and learning with them. Yeah, I mean, it is a beautiful switch when we stop controlling and decide to enter into a life of connection with our kids. Not only do we get to learn with them, but it also takes so much pressure off of us. Like, I did not used to find having to be the one that controlled everything and made all the decisions very much fun, actually. And I think that's another lie that we've kind of been sold, that parenting should be hard and it shouldn't be fun. And I just don't think that's true. 8 o'clock in the morning, cool. That's pretty early for a Sunday morning. So one of the things that
hi Joel, with my dad here, so I just want to say hi.
Oh yeah, so Joel, is that you, Joel, or is that Corey? I often don't know who it is when I see Joel's name, but I do think that is Joel. Yeah, he is a dad. He's a cool dad. Yeah, one of the things that Lainey and I do in our group sessions, and one of the focus points very early on actually in our program, is designing family culture. And really what that's about is how we can move from rules to values. And I remember years ago reading you know, an email that would pop up into my inbox every month from like a homeschooling or unschooling family. And I remember reading their account of living in their values. And at the time, I guess the kids were much younger. I remember thinking, oh my God, that's what I want. I want to live in our values. But I just didn't know how to get there because I think I was still imagining that rules were providing the framework for our lives. And certainly the kids were breaking most of them and pushing all the boundaries, but I wasn't yet in a place of feeling really comfortable with what to do about it, but really knowing that wanting to live in our values as a family was where I wanted to get to. So I know, because we've been living it, that designing your values and using that as a way of moving from rules actually is part of that journey, and it replaces the framework that rules kind of arbitrarily create for us. So when we're thinking about what our family life could look like, much of that life is how your day progresses, you know, what your schedule is, what you've got to do when, what the kids have to do, what they can't do. And to me, that felt like a really joyless way to live. But living in our values allows us to pretty confidently ditch the rules. And I actually overheard our children saying to somebody else a few weeks ago that we don't have any rules in our house. And it made me so excited to hear them say that to another kid. I think the other kid must have thought, what the hell? But what they don't mean is we are all just do what the hell we like, because this has evolved over time. They're talking about a way of living that doesn't rely on a list of things that we have to follow and must do every day. They're talking about a way of relating with each other that guides how we interact and guides what we do, that goes far beyond rules. And Lainey talks a lot about designing family culture, and that's a large part of what she's been doing in her work for quite a long time. And that's what it is. It's deciding how we want to live as a family. How do we want to treat each other? What do we want to do? How do we want to relate to the rest of the world? And what guides our family forward? And that's what can replace these arbitrary rules and like boundaries as we know it.
And it is powerful work, and it is work, right? It's work that we do together. And I guess the first part of living in values, right? A value-based culture versus a rules-based culture is figuring out as a family unit, number one, what is our family, and I hate to use this word, but what is our governance? Are we functioning within a partnership paradigm? What does that look like? How do we as a family unit decide things? How do we integrate input from everybody? How do we acknowledge, honor, and respect everybody's position and everybody's needs? And first, by figuring out what that governance is, again, is there a better word for that? There might be a paradigm, perhaps, I've always functioned within the partnership paradigm. You are here, you're interested in a partnership paradigm. I would say the default, though, is an authoritarian paradigm. We are the parents, we make the rules, you children follow the rules, and that happens to be what culture's default is. And so the first part of designing a family culture is releasing our connection, our commitment to that kind of paradigm, and reinventing how your family interacts and relates, right? And then from there, to be able to collaboratively decide what are the core values of our unit called our family. And by co-creating that document, or it doesn't have to be as formal as a document, but co-creating that agreement among every single family member where there is a buy-in. Rules, there's no such thing as rules anymore, because rules are arbitrary. Decisions that are in alignment with the co-created family culture values then are obvious. We don't do this as a family because we're not a family who does this. It's not a rule, but it's just not in alignment with the family culture that we've created. So that was like 4 steps forward in order to get to how actually you create a culture of values. There's no need for rules at that point. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that, that we don't sometimes have conflict in our family. I mean, we've got 6 people in our family. And so sometimes one person's interpretation of our family values might be slightly different to somebody else's, or, we've all kind of agreed loosely that we do a certain thing, but on a particular day, one person, that doesn't suit one person's idea for how they're wanting to control another person, because that happens, for children who all have their own independent ideas about all sorts of things. And so we still experience, that butting up against each other. And so I think it's helpful for people to know that this is not, this utopia where everything is perfect. But when you have a strong commitment to living in that way, it's a baseline, and you always come back to it. So when someone does something, that isn't very nice to another person in the family, or I'm just trying to think of something that's happened recently. Oh, Miles wouldn't play with Peggy, and so she spat on him. That's gross. And he wasn't very happy about that. So I'm pretty sure he spat back at her. And so then there was this conversation that went on for quite some time about, where they actually spat. Did I just spit near you? Did I spit on you? And that was a conversation, but it wasn't a conversation that involved me needing to really do anything other than just be available if they wanted me to, because they like to negotiate that stuff themselves. It certainly didn't involve any punishment. It didn't involve any force. It involves, most of the time when these sorts of things happen in our family, me just being available to reinforce a culture of connection and conversation and negotiation, and everybody being listened to. So actually, instead of what it might look like, instead of saying, you did the wrong thing, you need to go to your room, or you did the wrong thing, I'm going to take your iPad off of you, which probably takes about 3 seconds, it might actually be that we all sit down and we end up speaking for about an hour, because the conversation about why Peggy spat on Miles leads into, well, he never wants to play with me. And that leads into, well, I don't play with you because Arthur never plays with me because he doesn't like playing the same games as me. And then that leads into a conversation about whether everybody in the family is having their needs met. And if they're not all having their needs met, what can we tweak to make sure that they do? And that's actually real stuff that happens in our family all the time. So it's not quick. It requires an investment, and it requires the parent to be sitting in non-judgment when these sorts of conflicts happen. Instead of imposing rules, sometimes I'm a mediator. Sometimes I'm just sitting there supporting each child to have their turn being heard. And it very rarely means I get to decide what happens next. It most often means together they decide what happens next. And at the end of that, everybody's been heard. And that goes such a long way in a family of any size in reinforcing the family culture.
And a good part of our work to do as parents is to check our triggers. I recall time after time after time after time the response that I would get. You know, I'm a single mom and one child, so partnership is pretty clear. It's a 50-50 type of partnership, but it still has its challenges, even though it's pretty dedicated as to where the weight is in terms of, you know, who gets a say in what. We each get equal weight. But going back to what I was saying, my responsibility as the parent is to listen to the kind of reaction, the refusal, sometimes the nasty words, and figure out and help to unpack what's underneath that. Because if I start responding to, you know, some quick response that may be perceived by somebody as a nasty response, then we're talking about kind of surface level things. And if my reaction is based on my trigger to those words, then we never have the opportunity to figure out what's really happening. A lot of the conflict that my son and I actually experienced was in his early adolescence, and the frustration that he was feeling about feeling isolated came out in him being very nasty in certain occasions to me, not continuously, but like I was on the receiving end of some very unkind words. And yes, taking it personally would be the first place that most of us go. And it's very hard not to take this personally, but underneath the surface of the personalization, it wasn't about me. And recognizing and realizing that and being able to, in that moment, accept that this was the expression, that something beneath the surface was not right. If something beneath the surface was bothering him, and he didn't have the experience or even the knowledge to be able to access that piece right away. And that's all part of our growing process. And you know, if you look back at your own sort of triggers, right? You trigger, you react and you respond based on the trigger. If you've moved past being in reaction mode, that was a process for you too. You too, as a human, as an adult, have made mistakes where you weren't perfect either. So within the safe space of our family, we have to recognize that sometimes unkind words or unkind actions come out. And they come out not because our children are unkind, but because below the surface, their needs in one way or another are not being met. And that's what our work is, as well as parents, is to figure out the harmony that is needed in our family when somebody's needs are not being met, and to be able to not take it personally and go under the surface and do whatever you can to help recognize and facilitate that. Yeah, I hope that's useful.
Yeah, thank you. Vashti's just commented, yeah, wow, yes, when adults want kids to be more clear about what they're saying, when the kid does not have the vocabulary or emotional awareness to actually share how they're really feeling. Yeah, you know that saying, I don't know if it happens in other parts of the world, but certainly in Australia, use your words. just to a small child who's, you know, in the midst of a tantrum, who doesn't maybe even know the words to say how they're feeling. I always used to kind of think that was a bit odd. Yeah, but the thing that does happen, I notice that when someone is a child is in a position where they're not able to verbalize how they're feeling, being able to hold space for them be calm while they're having that big emotional release often moves them to a place where they then can verbalize how they're feeling, even really, really young children, as long as we've given them that opportunity to get that raw emotion out and not try to stop that by imposing a punishment. And I just wanted to pick up, Lainey, you were just talking, I just had this thought while you were sharing your story about Miro when he was younger. And I imagine that a lot of parents go to punishment when their child says an unkind word to them or to somebody else. And what it seems to me is that by punishing a child for doing something that we perceive to be bad or unkind or naughty or whatever, and imposing, our limit on them in that way, we're shutting down an opportunity to then get to what is actually going on. And really all we're teaching them is, I can't handle your emotion. I can't handle your unkind words. I'm not allowing you to speak them to me by punishing you. And that message is to that child, you need to keep your emotions hidden. And so we're never going to get to the bottom with that kind of more authoritarian or conventional parenting philosophy. We're never going to get to the bottom of what those feelings are. And then we'll actually stop seeing the feelings. In the same way as a toddler who's having a tantrum and being angry, and we try to distract them out of it, or we tell them off for doing it, we're going to really quickly teach them that we can't handle their big emotions. And because they can't handle them either, because they're a kid, they learn really quickly that no one can handle their emotions and they shouldn't show them anymore, and they push them down. And
Sarah, they're learning that it's not safe to share their emotions. And that's powerful.
Emma's just commented her daughter uses way too many words now. Sometimes hearing all of these words from our children about how they feel about stuff, is exhausting. Especially when they all want to tell you all of their big feelings at the same time. So I think, the other part of this that we'll probably get to at some point down the track is how parents can be supported to continue holding space for their children, because, man, it is intense when the kids want to tell us how they're feeling. Sometimes Dylan and I joke that we wished our children were slightly more repressed because, boy, it's hard work. And we're rarely triggered by our kids in that way anymore, but just the emotional exhaustion of having to hold your children gently and calmly and lovingly when they really want to tell you all of their feelings, it's pretty immense. I think that the other thing that the other tool, or the other thing that punishment does, which I guess is the opposite, a kid pushes a boundary. Unless you have these values to fall back on as a family that you can always go back and speak to, what's the alternative? Your kid pushes a boundary or breaks a rule. What are you going to do when they do that? If you don't have these values to fall back on, if you don't have a starting point for a conversation, if you don't have an agreed kind of mechanism to work through that stuff, when someone in the family, which could also be a grown-up, like we sometimes push boundaries too, what do you do? And ultimately, that's where we decided that we needed to work towards partnership with our children, because if you're not going to use punishment or coercion or manipulation, and other forms of that are bribery and shame, if we're not using those tools to get these results that we want from our children, then what are we going to do? So, one of your kids hits one of their siblings and they break the rule because you're a family that doesn't hit. Well, if you're not going to, tell them off, punish them, send them to their room, take their iPad away, not give them dessert, whatever it is, what are you going to do? Because that's often where people are left. And I remember feeling when I first started thinking about this stuff, Dylan and I were actually talking about this today. We went for a walk and we were just kind of reminiscing about when we first read an Alfie Cohen book when our first child was less than 1, and feeling really frustrated that Alfie Cohen talks about all the things not to do, but he didn't tell us what to do instead. And it took us some years to work out what to do instead. And, that's what we're talking about now. This stuff is instead of punitive parenting. You know, instead of telling our kids off, making them feel ashamed for doing the thing that we didn't want them to do, taking stuff away from them, putting them in their room, bribing them, coercing them, manipulating them, instead of doing that stuff, we're falling back on our family values and our family culture.
Powerful. It's powerful work. The other part of that work is to recognize the type of parenting that you were raised with, right? So in my experience, my parents, they were entitled to respect. This is what their expectation of their children were, because they were the adults. And that created a whole different set of interaction and relational ways of connecting to my own emotions, because they were greater than me. They were the authority because they were entitled to respect because of their age. It disengaged me from having my own emotions as being respected. So when that comes up for me, when that comes up, when I get upset, you know, and I get that immediate reaction that, wait a minute, he's not respecting me, I have to realize that that's part of my programming and part of my conditioning, that I don't have to let that program actually run, right? That I could recognize that that program that has been patterned since birth for me does not have to be the dominant thought process. And so working on our own triggers and recognizing that stuff is super powerful. And that's also part of what Sarah and I walk people through as we start looking at how to create these sorts of paradigms that might be in contrast to the patterning that was set for ourselves as parents during birth.
Because I'm not very good at doing two things at once when I'm on the computer. Because I was responding to a comment from Emma, and so I was like trying to navigate that while looking at the computer. I got a nice view of the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is the complete opposite to how many of us were raised. And so even though I truly believe we know it instinctively, it is almost like we've got to unlearn everything we thought we knew, everything we were told was true about parenting and relating with our children, and relearn something different. But what I really love about the fact that I can be honest with my children about that, and they are so gracious and kind and patient with us while we're learning the stuff that they already know. You know, they know how they want to live, and they know how humans best live, and they're doing it, and they're teaching us, and they have endless patience for all the boundaries that I push and remind me when I break family rules, or not rules, values. You know, if I speak unkindly to my almost 13-year-old, if I use this particular voice that she really hates, she will tell me, because I need reminding, because I'm still learning too. Hi, Archie. You might have to watch the replay, Archie. I think I know that we're nearly finished because I've drunk my 3 glasses of water that were next to me. I haven't got much speaking left in me.
I just wanted to comment, Sarah, one of the absolute beautiful things about sharing with our children about our own awareness, about our own patterning is, yes, they'll happily hold up a mirror so you can see when you're playing that story that you're choosing not to, you know, let be part of your dominant, you know, behavior. and they are willing to hold that up for you. And that also creates connection, right? Because we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable because we're still in progress, right? As human beings, we're always in progress. We're vulnerable, and vulnerable is the only path to connection. So it's necessary, you know, show up as you, the beautiful, flawed you, parent that you are, rich with all of these incredible experiences. And the contrast of knowing what you don't want sometimes gives you direction to the path that you do want. So they're all wonderful gifts. And I think our children are always our biggest teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I think we'll wrap it up there, but we would love to keep the conversation going, because I think boundaries, pushing boundaries, limits, arbitrary limits, letting kids do what they want, all of this stuff are really common questions that we get asked, and they're coming up in the group. They come up in response to things that I post on Facebook too. So I think it's a really worthwhile conversation, and we'd love to keep it going in the group. So if you want to continue putting comments, and we can have some really good dialogue. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I totally agree, Emma. Yeah.
Oh, Sally, good morning. You have to start from the beginning. We're just signing off. Mind you, it always takes me so long to find the button to switch off that you might have another 5 minutes of looking at our faces yet. Where's the button?
Just end meeting. It'll close.
Okay, I found it. Okay, night.